There are multiple reasons, all of which really result from the same thing, lack of communication and
Yep.
silos. And what I mean by that is it's not between the sponsor and the site. It's among the so
Hello again, Edie Edens, Darshan Kulkarni from the Kulkarni Law Firm, back with a different roles, shared goals. We left you on a cliffhanger in one of our previous episodes talking about fair market value, whether or not sites should in fact be paid different amounts.
and you can click
Also,
here, by the way, to get that.
yes, absolutely. Thank you. Good point. And so we really wanted to bring you this next episode to get into how is fair market value calculated, as well as really addressing the question that we left you with in the last one, which is what's the middle ground? We still haven't found it. So, Darshan, please take us away. I want you to kick us off.
So fair market value, there are a few different answers. I'd actually done a talk with a friend of mine from the Department of Justice. Actually, technically, she was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. This is going back 15 years. And Grand Plan had just come out onto the market. So we did this talk for DIA. And Grand Plan, this is again off the record, we were walking around the floor. And Harold Glass, who owned Grand Plan, who created Grand Plan, came to my friend and goes, so I know you just gave this talk. I just want to tell you that we get all this data from all of these sponsors, and we then can tell you what is the 25th percentile, what's the 50th percentile, what's the 75th percentile, and therefore I can tell you what fair market value is because we have all of this data. Would you agree that that's fair market value? My friend, she said, look, I'm not representing the U.S. Attorney's Office when I say the next words. How do I know you're not all overpaying? I have never been able to answer that question since then. So then I asked some other friends from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I went, how do you guys evaluate fair market value?
Hmm.
And they were like, look, we've got a bunch of statistics, statisticians who go through this stuff and blah, 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 blah. But for the most part, it's a gut reaction. If you know that someone's being paid $10,000 to give a 1 hour talk and you pay them every time you give that talk, yeah, chances are that's not fair market value.
So for me, I think of this in the perspective of, as you know, my spouse is an actuary in a life insurance company. And so he very much is that statistic probability nerd who's, got his 18 Excel screens open. And what they're going to come in and do is they're going to do market research on the need for whatever said product is. Part of it is what can the people we're trying to reach and sell to pay for this? How much do they need it? What's the supply demand? Part of it's what are all our competitors, if they have similar policies, doing? And they're going to use some exceedingly advanced analytics to then decide exactly the nuances of how they price and list and go about building and creating their product from the jump. Why we can't replicate something to that tune in clinical trials, I don't understand. Because to your point, I think it is fair for the federal government, whichever agency, but of course the DOJ, to go, how don't I know? Where's base? Where's the floor of fair market value?
We do know the floor. Medicare pricing is the floor.
True. But do we agree that we know from the clinical perspective, and I guess this is where I bring in my own self-admitted bias, that the Medicare prices don't actually cover it to cost.
No, they don't. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
But you asked floor.
Yeah.
Then comes what is fair and reasonable, and that might be commercial payment, which is why you'll often see some negotiations happen. I've never seen this negotiation actually happen at a budget level, but I've heard about negotiations that basically go, we will pay 160% of Medicare costs.
Hmm.
So have you ever done that type of negotiation? Because I haven't, but
I haven't been frontline on it, but I have been a part of an organization that's done one. Yes.
okay.
And I remember the percentages. Yeah.
Okay, so whatever that number was, the idea being you go, we know that Medicare just really lowballs you. So we've got to pay you more than that. And therefore, we're going to say Medicare plus. Or I've seen commercial insurer minus a certain number, or commercial insurer plus a certain number, depending on which insurer you use.
Does that account for the fact that we compensate clinical trial participants in a way that we're not going to quote unquote compensate the average clinical care patient? Like if I just go see my neurologist for my regular check-in for my migraines, I don't get a prize for that other than my neurologist, writes me another 6 month of prescriptions and helps me with any problems I'm having. if I'm a part of a study, yes, the visit is important and hopefully there's benefit in that visit to me and my health. Having said that, there is some other type of compensation. You're paying for my time, you're paying for my travel. I get a gift card at the end, whatever it is, right? Like it doesn't matter. The point is there's a compensation. So does that inherently change the fact that you really can't base the floor off of Medicaid pricing or Medicare pricing? Because that pricing wouldn't incorporate some of the other pieces that you do have to include in research.
If we consider the fact that patients are being paid, and I'm not sure I fully follow why you think the dynamic has changed. I thought you raised an interesting question, which is I don't actually, as a healthcare provider, really consider the fact that a patient is not taking their meds. Like I'll deal with it the next time they come in.
Right.
But I am now incentivized to do that if you're part of a clinical trial.
Right.
So the question then becomes, do we need to split out fair market value in a better way? And what I mean by that is maybe there's fair market value for the services rendered, and reminder services are a different service that needs to be reimbursed compared to the treatment service. And that's different from the marketing services that we need to render because we need to recruit patients, which we didn't have to do when we were negotiating the when we were negotiating Medicare. Like, I don't care if the patient comes in or not, I'm going to get paid the same. So to your point, I wonder if in this world where NIH funding's been taken away and or been reduced, and we're now effectively having to rejigger what fair market value is and what appropriate overhead costs are. Like a lot of what I just discussed were technically overhead costs. What
Right.
we've really technically thrown into overhead cost is the cost of an X-ray machine or of an MRI. Well, maybe those should really be part of our services rendered. Because you know what? An X-ray machine or MRI is part of giving a service for an X-ray machine or an MRI. But there is no cost of reminders. There is no cost of marketing. And if you're asking me to take on that cost, that's a separate cost and needs to be reimbursed in a different way. So to your point, I think that that does need to be considered. Well, let's now identify what's happening in that overhead cost and go, this needs to be reimbursed separately because it's just not covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or commercial payers. And I still have to, you still expect me to provide those services. If you're telling me you don't want me to send reminders, I will not. And your study will suffer for it.
Enjoying our content? We'd love to hear more. Please like, comment, share, and find more.
So now we're talking about how much and how transparent is fair to expect a sponsor to be about how they arrived at their quote unquote fair market value. We know they use likely a database of sorts, some, we'll call it grant plan en masse,
Actually,
but there's
before
several
that,
different.
Usually sponsors, most large sponsors, not the smaller ones, but the large sponsors actually have professional companies come in and
third
do a
party.
fair market value analysis. I've met some of those companies. I've never used them, but they'll come in and do that analysis for you. That decides what gets paid for and what amount. And then when that negotiation happens, that goes into grant plan or into whatever other tool you had.
But all of that, whether it's the third party or then what actually makes it into grant plan, that's what we're talking about in terms of the transparency down to the site of why and how we arrived at some of these numbers. And I'm not suggesting, to be fair, that a sponsor should just hang it all out there and put, all the skeletons out of the closet. Like there's absolutely proprietary reasons to not share with each and every one.
Find related podcasts below.
But why can't we have more transparent conversations with the direct recipient or the direct site around how we arrived at these particular budget numbers?
I'll give you the answer to that. There are multiple reasons, all of which really result from the same thing: lack of communication and silos. Yeah. And what I mean by that is it's not between the sponsor and the site is the funny part. The reason sites can do this for the most part, especially smaller sites, is because you're a flatter organization. You can call your boss and go, hey, how did we come up with this number? And he'll tell you, this is how I came up with the number. This is what I always charge, whatever it is. On the other hand, think about how this is happening at the sponsor level. Think about large pharma, right? You're going, my compliance people hired an outside vendor to come up with these numbers. Compliance person doesn't really want to know how you came up with the numbers. I just want to be able to sign off saying I had a third party to independently come up with this analysis. Do I really want to know how he or she did this analysis? No, I just need to put this into my database. Great. So now the compliance person doesn't really know. Then that compliance person is going to tell someone in clinical research, hey, you're going to be running the trial. Explain to me, I want you to use these numbers. Now the project manager there is going, okay, compliance told me, fine, moving on, these are the numbers.
Right.
Then you're going to use a CRO that talks to the project manager going, look, these are the numbers we're using. So now when you ask the CRO representative, because I've been that person, the contract negotiator from the CRO, and you go, explain to me how you came up with these numbers. I have no freaking idea. They told me to use that database.
And the other part of it too is you often have incentivization at the CRO level of, well, what if I could get a site to come in below this budget? Like you approved X, but if I could get them to come in at Y and save you money, that sweetens the deal. And so there's actually incentivization to go the opposite direction. And in fact, I don't know about you, if you've heard this, I have heard from sites, they know very specific budget negotiators at different sponsors by name and by nickname who are known for coming in to close low work. And you're right. I mean, I certainly don't want to oversimplify that getting something done at a, 15,000 person organization is so easy compared to a 15-person organization. Fair enough. I know that the power dynamic is not in the site's favor. And I'm always one, not so much for rooting for the underdog, rather, I do think there needs to be a fair power dynamic at the core foundational infrastructure of our clinical trials if we then expect to create trials that are accessible to those outside of the power dynamic, right? Like if we start our foundational infrastructure based on power dynamic, then the follow through, the patients that receive care, the patients that find these trials accessible based on these pricing models will reflect what we started the foundation with. Does that make sense? And that's
sort
another
of,
topic.
but I feel like it's a different conversation we need to have just so people hear, does the differential power dynamic impact patient care in the context of a clinical trial? So if you stay tuned, we'll hopefully get to this topic at some point. So Edye,
Absolutely.
for them to follow the next video, how can they first reach us if they have questions?
Yep, absolutely. Hit the website, kulkarnilawfirm.com. Email either of us, Edye, Darshan at kulkarnilawfirm.com. And of course, you can find us on YouTube and LinkedIn. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Call, click, or email